So I was born in Argentina. My family moved to the U.S. when I was a little kid. Learned English, went to school in the U.S., and ended up at the University of Massachusetts, where I started a community radio hour at a very small basement community radio station. And from there, it became a podcast, a syndicated radio show, put cameras in the studio after meeting Cenk from the Young Turks, who in 2008 said, I think there might be a future on YouTube, so you might want to start filming what you're doing. So I did that, and then we partnered up with Free Speech TV, which is on DirecTV and Dish, and that's kind of been the show since. And then, we've grown over time, added staff and ad sales, and it sort of changed over those years. But that was like the genesis of it when I was at the University of Massachusetts and was interested in politics, wanted to do something in media, and the opportunity sort of presented itself.
So you were what, like 21 when you started?
I was 21, that's right.
What made you want to start it in the first place?
Boredom, mostly. I mean, I was looking for something additional to do other than just being in college and having some kind of part-time job. So it was once every other week. It could have become nothing. I could have just kind of left it when I finished my bachelor's degree. But I liked it enough that I thought, let me see if I can keep doing this while I'm in grad school getting my MBA. Saw my MBA classmates become management consultants and audit people and that type of thing, which was not appealing to me at all. So at that point I said, I'm going to give it a year of just focusing on this like it is my job. And we were sort of a combination of timing and other things that fell into place where it became a full-time job. And now we employ a number of people and we have investors in the show. And it's a real thing. It's amazing how it all happened slowly,
right.
But we've come a really long way from, when I was at UMass as a junior.
Right. And has it always been politically based?
Basically, yeah. It's mostly U.S. politics, some international, some current events. The interviews are pretty wide-ranging, so I'll interview politicians, but also people from the music industry or professors, authors, fiction authors sometimes. It's really whatever I'm interested in, but it's mostly politics.
Gotcha. And is it true that for a while you were the youngest nationally syndicated political host? Did I read that
For
right?
a while, but I'm much older now.
But you're not. Yeah.
I don't, it's funny because now I don't even really follow radio anymore, even though it's still a part of what I do, because it's become so secondary, both in terms of my audience and the sort of revenue sources that we're dealing with. And it's incredible because when I had started the show, I never would have even dreamed of being on as many radio stations as we are now. And now that I am on all those radio stations, it's really become very secondary or even tertiary to the business model because so much of the audience has moved online.
Yeah, it's so, we've had on a few guests that come from companies that started off as radio shows, and they were successful radio shows for decades.
Sure.
And then they were smart enough, their company, to realize that they needed to make this shift to like digital, YouTube, podcasts. And I think they're very much in the same boat where it's like, yeah, we have these nationally syndicated shows. It's great. We're all over the place, but like the focus has very, very much changed. So I think it's very interesting.
Yeah. And I would never think of not having the show on radio or television anymore, but it definitely has changed how I think about the content. We're thinking about it as having to be structured in a way that fits on radio. It's still something we do, but it's not nearly as important as it was at the very beginning when where can the breaks fit in for our local affiliates and all of those questions. They're really not questions anymore. We just kind of do it. If they're interested in it, great. But the focus has become the online audience.
Yeah. And for people who might not know, your political leaning and your show comes from a progressive perspective, right?
That's right. Yeah. It's a left-wing show. It's an opinion show. There's no hiding that. There's no, pretending that this is a on the one hand, on the other hand thing, but actually being a progressive show. Those are my politics, and it's always been a show that's what it's about, really. With the exception of, like, at the very beginning, there was a very short period of time where I was sort of scared to just give my opinion.
Yeah.
Because I was correctly assessing that I would start getting a lot of hate and angry emails and whatnot. But then I realized, number one, it's really boring for me to do on the one hand, on the other hand type of thing. And I was getting the hate anyway because a lot of people don't like centrism anyway. So there was like no upside to doing that. And after like 2 months, I said, I'm just going to do every story the way I see it, for better or worse. And if people don't like it, as long as they aren't liking it with a correct understanding of what my views are, then that I can deal with, and that's fine.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right in that nobody's going to be happy no matter what you do. So if you wanted to do that, you may as well have. But also, like, we kind of laugh around here about some programs, and look, if they truly feel that way and they can do it, good for them. But there's a lot of programs out there that try so hard to tout that they are neutral or that they're both sides, and it's so hard to do that unless that is your number one goal. There's actually one guy, I don't know if you've ever heard of him. It's called like Agenda Free TV or something like that. Have you heard of him?
No, I haven't.
It's like I think it's new. I don't think he's been doing it long. He actually does a pretty good job of like, it's like pretty boring. He'll just like sit when breaking news is happening and see what's going on. But for the most part, I feel like most people have their slants and biases.
I mean, I think that there's a really important distinction between being objective and being neutral. Neutral is sort of a proactive decision that you are going to kind of play both sides and concoct or fabricate a position where it doesn't appear as though you are taking a side. As you're pointing out, just about everybody has some kind of bias. Even if it's not a political bias, there can be advertiser bias or corporate bias or whatever kind of bias. Objectivity, I find to be much more interesting and more important, and that's what I try to do. So when I make an assessment of what I think is a good policy or not a good policy, I'm not pretending to have a position that is any different from my true, sincere, genuine position, but I try to be objective in accurately characterizing what my opposition's views are, why they came to those conclusions, so on and so forth. So I think a lot of times neutrality is the wrong goal, and objectivity is sort of a better thing to strive for.
Oh, that's interesting. And while we're talking about interviewing people and kind of being in the space, I mean, so you've been involved in the political sphere for what, 15 years, however many years. Have you, over that time, have you seen a rise in the intensity and the way that we talk about like political issues or politicians, or has it always been this contentious?
I think it's always been this contentious in terms of the strength of people's disagreements. But I think particularly in the last couple of years, there's been sort of a coarsening of the discourse that's acceptable. And I think that certainly the president has been encouraging that. We've had a president who talks in a way that we've not seen any president, certainly in the modern era, of audiovisual records of how a president behaves. So I think there's definitely been a sort of coarsening in terms of what counts as valid political debate and discourse. I don't actually believe that the disagreements are any more significant. The disagreements have been pretty significant in the political world for a long time, but the way we talk about them, I think, has definitely changed.
I mean, this is your living. Like, this is what you talk about every day. Does the contentiousness ever get to you?
It does. I mean, I go out of my way to stay almost completely off of social media on weekends and after hours. I don't pay attention to the news on weekends. I'll go visit my mom and she'll say, "Did you see what?" And I'll say, I didn't. And I'm not working right now. And just really having calculated and planned time off from it, because it gets very, very toxic for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we were just yesterday, we had a shoot with another guest, and it hasn't aired yet, so I won't say who, but we were talking about how the role of social media and 24-hour news cycles might be contributing to this divisiveness. I don't know if you feel the same way, but it was a really interesting conversation on how it's just like we have a hard time with it. He's also like pretty involved in the space, and he had an incident. He had like a live event, and there was a huge strong reaction to it that he got a lot of blowback online, and he was just like, I'm like not on Twitter anymore because of it.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who have opted out of some of the social media platforms. I still use them all because they are important for my brand and for spreading awareness about what I'm doing and growing an audience. But I recently interviewed Cal Newport after reading a number of his books, including Deep Work and Digital Minimalism, and it's just abundantly clear that there's something very negative about the sort of constant scrolling social media culture. It's proactively making people less satisfied with their lives. It's increasing anxiety and depression. And so I'm trying to find a balance between what's good for me as an individual while at the same time, having a role and a presence on all of these platforms, because one of the reasons why it's so important now to focus on the online platforms and less on radio and television for me is because social media has allowed those online platforms to become so big. So I can't neglect them, but at the
Yeah.
same time, it's all about sort of finding a balance and finding the right amount of exposure to those platforms.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's two easy things you can do. One, click subscribe, and two, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.